If you're Jamaican and you think the invasion of Venezuela by America is only Venezuela's business, then you need to listen to me clearly and listen to the end. Because what just happened over there is not normal. Not for the Caribbean, not for international law, and definitely not for Jamaica's future. A sitting president was captured in a U.S. military raid and taken to New York to face charges. And the UN is now arguing in real time about whether the world just crossed a line it can't uncross. And here's the part that should make every Jamaican sit up. When big powers start treating the Caribbean like a chessboard again, small countries like ours don't get to just sit quietly in the comfort of our homes and watch. We get pushed, pulled, pressured, and priced out. So this video exists to do what the quick headlines cannot do. To go back before the raid, before the sanctions, before the oil tankers running dark, and explain how Venezuela became the kind of country where global powers feel bold enough to do something like this right in our neighborhood. And then I'm going to bring it back home to Jamaica, because this is not only a Venezuela story. This is a warning for Jamaica, the entire Caribbean, and by extension, the world. The modern Caribbean is built on two invisible highways. One is the sea lane highway, shipping routes that carry fuel, food, fertilizer, and everything your supermarket shelves depend on. The other is the debt highway, loans, bonds, and agreements that decide who can build roads, power plants, ports, and who ends up paying forever. Venezuela sits like a boulder on the first highway. Jamaica sits like a toll booth on the other. And right now, both highways are shaking. So to understand why, you have to understand what Venezuela really is in the global system. Venezuela isn't just a country with problems. No, Venezuela is oil. For most of the 20th century, Venezuelan oil helped fuel the modern world, the industry, the war, the development, everything. And when a nation is that valuable, it attracts power, the way meat attracts flies. In the 1970s, when oil prices soared, Venezuela didn't just get rich, they got addicted. The state became the provider of everything. Subsidies, big promises, national pride, and like every resource addiction, it came with a curse. When the price drops, the country didn't just lose money, it loses stability, it loses legitimacy, it loses control. So by the late 1980s, the pressure exploded into the streets. And one of the turning points was the Caracas, a wave of unrest that became a scar in the Venezuelan political memory and a symbol that a social contract was cracking. So out of anger came a soldier with a message. And that soldier was Hugo Chavez. Chavez tried to take power by force in the early 1990s, but he failed, and then later won power through elections. And he didn't come as a manager. He came as the revolution himself. And from there, Venezuela entered a long era where oil money and politics became welded together like steel. Now here's where the international story gets serious. Because when Chavez and his movement reshaped the state, they also reshaped who Venezuela could rely on. In the early 2000s, Venezuela hit political crisis after political crisis. There was a coup attempt. There was a massive standoff around PDVSA, the state's oil company. And then came the strike that nearly shut the country down. PDVSA workers and managers went on strike for weeks. Oil production stalled, exports stalled, and it turned into a national battle for the country's future. Chavez survived, but he didn't survive alone. During the 2002 to 2003 oil shutdown, Venezuela leaned on outside help, including technical assistance and emergency support from friendly governments and producers. And this is where Russia and China begin to matter, not as side characters, but as pillars. Because when the US relationship became hostile, countries like Venezuela didn't just float. They searched for other help. China became one of those other helps. Not out of charity though, out of interest. They did oils for loans, infrastructure for access, money now, barrels later. And as the relationship deepened, Venezuela's economic survival became tied to global rivalries that had nothing to do with the ordinary Venezuelan people trying to buy flour and diapers. So Russia now became another help. Military cooperation, diplomatic backing, a shared worldview about resisting US dominance. So by the time Venezuela slid into deeper crisis, it wasn't just a domestic collapse. It was a geopolitical knot. And then the knot tightened. Oil prices collapsed in the mid-2010s. Venezuela's state spending model built on oil cash started choking. And when the state can't provide, the society turns desperate. Shortages, hyperinflation, migrants leaving in millions. And as the country weakened, the international pressure campaigned hard. Sanctions, diplomatic isolations, competing claims for legitimacy. Now, let's pause for a second and let that sink in, because this is where it gets rather interesting. This is where Caribbean history should start ringing bells in Jamaicans' ears. We've seen this movie before. A political country decides it has a right to shape leadership in its region. It uses law, force, and economics in the same breath. And the smaller nations get told, pick a side. That's what makes the January 2026 moment so dangerous. Because what happened wasn't just an arrest, it was an act of power. Reuters reports the US military raid captured President Nicolas Maduro, moved him to New York, and the US officials framed it as justice against a narco-terrorist regime. Maduro called it kidnapping, and Venezuela's remaining leadership denounced it as an attack on sovereignty. And instantly, the world split, because some governments cheered while others condemned the attack. Spain's prime minister called it a violation of international law. The UN Secretary General warned it sets a dangerous precedent, and the Security Council was pulled into an emergency debate. China's response, however, was not quiet. Reports have it that China criticized the idea of any country acting like the world's judge. And analysts described it as a major test of China's diplomatic push. Now, Russia's posture was coldly strategic, losing an ally, but potentially using the chaos to benefit in a world where rules are being bent. And even the UN Human Rights Office weighed in, saying the world is less safe when intervention becomes normalized. But the part that most Jamaicans won't feel immediately is where the ships come in. Because while the world argues about legality, the sea is already moving. Before the capture, the US escalated pressure on Venezuela's oil lifeline. Reports are that the US seized a sanctioned oil tanker of Venezuela in December 2025, sharply escalating tensions. Then came more interdictions, moves aimed at cutting oil revenue. Then there was a blockade posture hardened. Tankers waiting, tankers turning, tankers going dark. And now, just days into January 2026, reports are that multiple tankers left Venezuela with no flag or safety documentations and then disappeared from tracking. A sign of dark mode, shipping under extreme pressure. Another report described roughly a dozen loaded tankers leaving Venezuela with unclear destinations. And the chase didn't stay in Venezuelan waters. A major tanker linked to sanctioned trade was being monitored, moving towards Europe with political complications because it's now under the Russian flag. This is what a regional crisis looks like in 2026. Not just soldiers, not just speeches, but supply chains, fuel routes, shipping insurance, and port access. And if you're Jamaica, that matters because we import what we eat, we import what we drive, and we import what we build with. So when oil routes get tense, Jamaica pays. Not because we caused anything, but because Jamaica lives downstream of global power. Now, let's talk about the part that Jamaica will recognize immediately. Petrocarib. Because Petrocarib wasn't just cheap oil. It was breathing room. Venezuela Petro-Caribbean program gave countries in the region oil under financing terms that reduced upfront cash pressure and helped governments manage budgets. Jamaica benefit from that. And when Venezuela collapsed, that lifeline faded. So that basically means that Jamaica returned to a global market, paying global prices up front, while trying to run schools, hospitals, roads, and policing. So when Venezuela burns, Jamaica feels heat in the form of higher costs and less flexibility. Now here is where your question about China and debt becomes personal. Because when small states lose affordable energy deals, they go shopping. Not in supermarkets, but in financial markets, in loan offices, in development partnership. And that's where China becomes Jamaican debate. Jamaica has used Chinese financing for major infrastructures, including the North-South Highway project. Documents have it that China's development bank loan terms for Jamaica's North-South Highway, showing long maturities and specific interest structures. Jamaican officials have also tried to calm the debt trap fears, stating that Chinese loans are a small portion of Jamaica's total debt portfolio, and that most would be repaid within a defined window. And Prime Minister Andrew Holness publicly said Jamaica would not be accepting new loans from China at that time. So let's be honest and balanced. This isn't about China is coming to own Jamaica tomorrow. That wouldn't be responsible. But it's about something Jamaicans understand deep in their bones. Debt can become a leash. And if global shocks keep coming, oil shocks, climate shocks, trade shocks, countries will get tempted to grab fast money. And fast money always have a long shadow. And the world right now is not a gentle place for countries that owe. So when you ask how China involvement in Jamaica might end us in debt to China, the real answer is not because China is magic, but because in moments of crisis, governments can make desperate deals. And desperate deals are how sovereignty gets slowly rented out. This is exactly why Venezuela matters. Because Venezuela shows what happens when a state builds its entire legitimacy on one pillar, oil, and then that pillar cracks. And then once weakened, the country becomes a magnet for bigger powers. The US says it's justice and security. China says it's sovereignty and opposition to unilateral world judge behavior. And Russia sees opportunity in a world where force replaces rules. And ordinary people get crushed in the gears. Now let's bring that back to Jamaica. Because Jamaica is not Venezuela, but Jamaica is vulnerable in its own way. We depend heavily on external flows like tourism dollars, remittances, imported fuel, imported food, and global credit conditions. So the fact that Jamaica's immune system is not that strong, when the world sneezes, Jamaica catches a cold. And if we don't build more resilience, we'll keep having the same conversation every time there's a world crisis. We'll say things like, why food's so expensive? Why gas is so high? Why is the dollar rate running? And why are we always borrowing? So here is the truth I want Jamaicans to sit with. The capture of a president in Venezuela is not just drama. It's a signal flare. And it says the Caribbean is entering an era where power is being used more openly, where interventions are being argued after they happen, where ships are seized, tankers vanish off tracking, and oil becomes a battlefield again. And if that becomes normal, Jamaica's best defense is not a speech. It has to be preparation, diversification, energy planning, food security, and serious diplomacy. Because the next time the region gets hot, Jamaica needs options. Not just prayers, options. So here is my question to you. And I want you to answer it like you're planning for your children. Not just for next week. What can Jamaica build so we can't be blackmailed by global shocks? Drop your answers in the comment section below. And if this video made you see the region different, tap the like button and let the algorithm carry it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And as always, Jamaicans, walk good. Blessings, my friends.